Okay, so towards the end of the class, last meeting, we talked a bit about Plato's theory of forms. This is his metaphysical theory, his metaphysics. It's often referred to by the commentators as the theory of forms or the theory of ideas. Occasionally, you'll hear that one. So I'll kind of I'll briefly review the theory itself. We'll look at some problems with it, and then after that, we're gonna move on. I mean, I don't know how much I'm gonna say about the medieval period, but I'll probably make a few comments on medieval philosophy. But mainly, what I'd like to do, if this is possible, you know how I go. You know, I tend to ramble sometimes. But what I'd like to do is spend at least some of our class time covering the scientific revolution. I don't know if we're going to have time for that. Depends on how long I guess I spend wrapping up Plato. But I'd like to talk about the scientific revolution, talk a bit about modern philosophy, which I think that'll probably be more likely. I can cover that pretty quickly. That will give us a bit of a preview of where we're going. It's, I would argue, very difficult to fully appreciate this next essay without a little bit of historical context and specifically knowing something about what really went on, some of the key points, some of the essentials regarding the scientific revolution, or otherwise known as the Copernican revolution. So, like I said, I'd like to get to that today. If I don't, no biggie. We can pick it up after spring break. But just to repeat, over the break, try to read well, don't try. Get the first meditation read, finish that, and try to read as much of the second meditation as you can. But let's get back to Plato and let's try to wrap this up pretty quick. I covered the theory of forms last time, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. But Plato, and we get this at the end of the symposium, it's very apparent that Plato seems to place a very high value on what we might think of as ideas, abstract things that aren't tangible. Um, and he believes that these ideas have a certain nature to them that we might find hard to grasp. So in the symposium, we saw his treatment of beauty when Socrates is told by Diotima that in order to be a true lover and to find true beauty, that he has to proceed through steps, and that he has to start with this very vulgar form of beauty, the beauty of one particular body, and then moving up through the ladder of love. We covered it that last time, so I won't revisit it too much. But climbing up, we get further removed from the physical, more what you might say, or what someone might argue is superficial um, versions of beauty or experiences of beauty, to a deeper, more intellectual, less physical, less tangible, more abstract conception of beauty, the form of beauty. So anyway, somebody in the comments asked, and I'll just answer real briefly. I already addressed this, but just real quick, I'm hoping. Don't quote me on this, but yeah, I'm hoping that this is the last Zoom meeting we do. As far as I know, we're going to meet on campus when we get back from spring break. So let's just hope it stays that way. I don't want to jinx myself, so we'll just keep it at that. But yeah, keep looking at your emails. If UH downtown sends something otherwise, then I guess we'll do otherwise. But I'm planning on it. I'm planning on being on campus. So back to the forms. What the heck is a form? What's so great about it? And how does Aristotle, who's another philosopher who we're going to unfortunately have to cover briefly, very briefly, but how does someone like Aristotle respond to Plato and some of the issues that his theory basically lays on the table for us? I mean, Plato himself, I think, knew I don't think I know, because I've read so much of his work. Plato was aware of the own shortcomings of his theory, but he was pretty insistent that he was onto something and that he was close to truth, and that truth, when we want to understand something, we want to understand the truth about something, we want to turn away from our senses. We want to turn away from what he would call the visible realm, the realm that we have access to through the body, through our physical form. We want to turn away from that. And just like the person in the allegory of the cave, the prisoner, we want to turn away from that. That's a shadow world. We want to turn our soul towards the forms, towards these ideal eternal forms, the form of beauty, the form of the good. And for him, those are the only things that we can truly have knowledge of. The world that we live in now, the world that we're stuck in now in our physical form, is in a constant state, or sorry, a constant process of change, of becoming, is a phrase or a word that gets used in Plato. Coming to be. My physical body, for instance, is never in a constant state. Not only am I moving around, making all these gestures with my hands, and my mouth is moving and all these words are coming out, but not just that, even if I were just completely stable and steady and not even moving at all, I'm getting older at every moment. And so my body's always in this process of change. Plato argues because of that. He's not alone in this, but he argues that because of this, like many of his predecessors, he takes the tack that we can't really have knowledge of such things. I can't have knowledge of the physical world because it's always shifting, it's always changing. The only thing I can have knowledge of is this eternal world that doesn't change. I can have knowledge of the beautiful itself. Anything that I see in the physical world that I call beautiful is really just a shadow, or a imperfect copy, or a deficient or insufficient replica of true beauty, of this eternal form of beauty, which itself is outside of time and space and has no physical form. It has no spatial temporal form, no spatial temporal aspect. This is another problem I think with Plato's forms, is that they're so vague. The passage I read at the end of class last time, where you get this description of the form of beauty, the beautiful itself, it's not that instructive, I would say. It's very mysterious. There's a lot more negative things said about beauty, what it isn't. It's not in anything, it's not in a hand, it's not in an animal, it's not in a body. It is just itself, by itself, in itself. It's not beautiful this way or beautiful that way. It's not ugly on this side and beautiful on the other side. It's not beautiful some days. And these are all very just sort of vague, abstract assertions, and they're really just negative. They're just, this is what it isn't. This is something I think we could criticize Plato for when we get to forms like, especially things like beauty, and one of his favorite, we won't get too much into this, the form of the good. And also there's other forms too that are like big and small, which have, those have issues in themselves. When we look at things like, I want to give him a little bit of a fair shake here. When we look at things like geometrical truths, mathematical truths, then I think Plato's theory, his metaphysics, tends to be a little bit more intuitive. Because whether or not there's an actual circle in nature, whether there are actual perfect circles in the world, the physical world, the things that are true about circles don't change. The properties of a circle are always the same. The way a circle is defined is always the same. It doesn't depend on anything else besides just what a circle is. Same thing with triangles and other geometrical shapes. Same thing when it comes to mathematical truths. And I'm afraid, though, that Plato uses mathematics and geometry as his model for all knowledge. That if it doesn't live up to the standard of mathematics, if it doesn't live up to the standard of geometry, then it needs to be rejected as just mere opinion, as just mere speculation, as just belief that might somehow hit at part of the truth, right? When I look at some person and I think they're beautiful, when I have like, a crush on somebody and I'm like, oh, she's really cute. It's not that I'm completely wrong for Plato. What he's going to say is that there's something in her that you like, you're drawn towards that resembles this idea of beauty, this form of beauty, which is the true beauty. And that true beauty is what allows you to even recognize the beauty in her. And not only is this idea what makes you recognize the beauty in her, it's what causes it. That's another very vague and unclear thing about Plato. One problem with his theory is, how does an idea like beauty cause beautiful things? He uses some examples in his book, The Republic, that seem to work. I think I mentioned these last time. He talks about a carpenter making a desk, and the carpenter has an idea or a concept of the desk. And obviously, that idea, in a sense, if you're loosely speaking, causes the desk. The desk wouldn't exist if the idea didn't precede it. But he says this is true of all things. How beauty, or the concept of beauty, causes beautiful people or plants or animals or sunsets or art, that is something that he is very vague about. And it really boils down to, and I think this is a good segue to Aristotle, there's a difficulty in Platonic or Platonist metaphysics trying to explain the relationship between this higher realm of forms, this perfect, unchanging realm that's outside of time and space. What's the relationship between that higher realm and the lower realm that we're more familiar with through our senses? How do these two realms interact? He wants to say that the higher realm of forms explains, helps us understand, and also is the cause of the lower realm. But he's never really that clear about how that works. What is the nature of the interaction? And in fact, the way that he describes the forms, it almost seems like he paints himself into a corner where there really can't be any interaction. If the form of beauty is itself by itself, it can't really commingle or be a part of the physical. There's this unbridgeable gap between what Aristotle calls the actual and the ideal in Plato. The world of ideas and ideals is somewhere separate from time and space. And so we're stuck in time and space, says Aristotle. And for him, I want to know what's going on in time and space. I want to have knowledge of the here and now. But for Plato, and again, I think that part of the problem with Plato is he uses math and geometry as sort of that's the standard for all knowledge. The nature of mathematical knowledge has to be the nature of all knowledge. If it's not eternal, if it's not unchanging, if it's not independent, right? The truths of a circle don't depend on anything but a circle. What a circle is. The truth of mathematics, same thing. They're just true because they're true, because of the nature of the concepts and the ideas themselves. But is all truth that way? Aristotle doesn't think so. Aristotle thinks that you can know things about physical things. You can have knowledge. You can have knowledge of this world. If the only knowledge is knowledge of the ideal, then for Aristotle, he argues, the knowledge is impossible if the ideal is somehow separated from this world. In a way, Plato admits this to a certain extent. In some of his works, he seems to hint that the only way we can have true knowledge is through our death, because when we die, our soul escapes our body, right? And then our body isn't holding us down like this prison, and we're not attached to our senses, and so our mind, our pure soul, can finally contemplate this world of forms that's outside of time and space. But even Plato says that's just a hope. He doesn't know. Remember what Socrates says in the Apology, no one knows, but he's looking forward to death. Maybe this also explains a bit of his asceticism. We talked about his asceticism earlier in the semester, so I won't dwell on it too much here, but if you remember, asceticism is this sort of philosophy that discourages any attachment to physical or sensual pleasure in favor of a life of intellectual pursuit, you know, philosophy and such. And so there's a practical reason for this. Not only is it ethically good, but it prepares you for an escape. Once you die, your body will be, you know, left behind, and you can contemplate the forms. And that's just a big maybe. That's a big maybe. But Plato's sort of holding out hope. Aristotle's like, I'm not so sure about that. I want to have knowledge now. And he thinks that he can. Aristotle thinks that he can. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on Aristotle, but we kind of have to spend a little bit of time on him. I'm really ready to move on to Descartes. I pretty much said all I wanted to say about Plato. But to really fully appreciate, I think, what's going on in Descartes, it's important that we say a little bit about Aristotle. Because as I was mentioning at the beginning of the lecture, Descartes is writing this essay in the midst of, in sort of the, you know, kind of in the height of the scientific revolution. And he's responding to that. His philosophy develops out of that. He's a part of it, really. People mention Descartes often as the father of modern philosophy. But if you want to understand Descartes and you want to understand modern philosophy, you kind of have to know what it's responding to. You have to understand what the scientific revolution was a revolution against. And to do that, you got to know a little bit about Aristotle. Because as influential as Plato was, Aristotle was even more influential. Aristotle was one of his students. He moved on from Platonic metaphysics, as I've sort of hinted at already. You know, he had his reservations about this theory of forms, but his overall thought had a big impact on the way that scholars did science, what we would call science today, logic, politics, ethics, even how they did theology, even how religious Christians, early Christians, early Muslims, some Jewish theologians. It had a huge influence on all the learned people in ancient times. They pretty much used Aristotle as a framework. His approach to doing philosophy was a basic framework for all the sciences, all the disciplines, for over 1,000 years. It wasn't until people like Descartes came along, it wasn't until the scientific revolution came along, that all changed. That Aristotle was starting to get rejected, and a new system of exploring and inquiring about the world and doing science was developed. And so, again, I don't want to spend too much time on Aristotle, but we got to talk a bit about him, just to provide a good contrast between him and the moderns, and maybe we'll say a little bit about medieval philosophy along the way, because that's sort of in the middle, right? We're right now ending the ancient, the classical period, the Greeks, and we're kind of gonna skip over a lot, like we're not even mentioning the Romans barely, or I'm not mentioning them at all, except for just then, and you know, medieval period, but we're going to move on to the modern period. We're talking like 17th century here, 1600s. So what do I want to say about Aristotle? We'll try to keep it brief. Okay, so his solution to this whole issue of how do we have knowledge of this physical world if it's constantly changing, if it's constantly shifting? For Plato, he just denied you could have knowledge of it. You know, anything you know about it, even if it's true, it's changed. I remember I had a physics professor that once said something like this. He said that any measurement that you take in the physics lab is no longer accurate. It's like the moment you took it, whatever you measured has already changed. The physical structure of it, something about it. It might be a very minute detail, but all physical matter is in some process of change, decay. It's losing particles, it's gaining particles, etc. And the Greeks knew this. They didn't know about atoms. They didn't know about all that. I mean, there were some atomists back then, but they didn't have, the sort of modern science that we did. But they knew that all physical things were in this process of change. And for some philosophers, they found ways around this. They found ways of, well, you can understand the change. There are things that are constant about the change. But there were others like Plato who just rejected. They said, well, the world's full of contradiction if there's change. So this world is an illusion. This world is a shadow of an ideal, perfect world. Aristotle's solution was a bit ingenious. He didn't, turn to the world itself and just sort of embrace the change completely, like this chaotic world out there that some of the pre-Socratics embraced. But he didn't fly to some stable, mathematically, eternally perfect, ideal world either. For Aristotle, all there was this actual world that we're in. The forms were not some separate entities out there. For Aristotle, what Plato would call forms, substantial forms, were actually not separate from physical things. There was no such thing as chairness apart from chairs. There's no such thing as the beautiful itself apart from beautiful things. That forms are embedded in particular things. I'm a particular thing. I'm a human being, a man, whatever you want to classify me as. And I'm made up of matter. That's a real thing. Substance, blood, and organs, right? And all the, water and H2O, all the chemicals that I'm made of, right? But I'm also a human. I fit into a category that other things fit into. There are features that I have that other beings share. And this, I think, is the relevant part for moving on to modern science. Part of my form and part of what makes me essentially what I am is what I'm drawn towards. So each substance for Aristotle, each thing that exists in the universe, each individual person, this pen, this bottle of water, everything that exists is there for some reason. It has an aim. It has a function. It has a purpose. For Aristotle, he argued that human beings, our purpose is happiness. We naturally have a tendency, it's in our nature as a rational animal. That's kind of our essence, to be rational, but to be rational means to pursue happiness. And for him, happiness means self-actualization. It's not just brute pleasure. Happiness is fulfilling yourself, becoming the best version of yourself you can be. And in a way, this is kind of the purpose of all living things. Plants, as a plant grows, it has this inner movement. It has this inner aim. It's aiming towards its fulfillment. It's trying to be the healthiest, the best plant it can be. And all plants are going to be different because they're all in different conditions. Some of them get more sunlight than others. Some of them get better soil than others. Some of the plants get more water and all these other factors, better weather conditions, barometric pressure. We can go on and on about all the details. But every single plant, even though they're unique and different, they're their own plant, they're all aiming to become the perfect flower, right? The perfect rose if you're a rose, the perfect avocado if you're an avocado, the perfect whatever, whatever the plant. That's not even a plant. That's the fruit on the plant. You get my point. And so each thing has an aim, has a purpose, and in order to study things and to understand things, one has to know the aim. One has to know the purpose. One has to know the function. And this applies to all sorts of ways of looking at the world, whether we're looking at biological beings, whether we're looking at human beings as social beings, politics. This metaphysics of Aristotle was applicable to all sorts of modes of inquiry. If I'm trying to study history, how do I analyze World War II, for instance? I have to know the aim. What were all the parties involved? What was their aim? What was their goal? And I can sort of understand a sequence of events that lead up to that goal. So for Aristotle, we're never going to get this full picture of the universe that Plato envisions. Like we die someday, our soul is released from the body, we get this universal vision of how it all fits together and why it's all good and perfect and it is the way it should be. This is not possible for human beings, says Aristotle. That's too much for how modest and how simple we are as creatures, right? For Aristotle, we are pretty awesome, but we're not gods. We aren't gods, and so there's no way that we could have this complete picture of the universe. But we can understand certain sections. We can study art and know what the purpose and the meaning of art is and what makes a play a good play or a bad play if we know the aim of it, right? Maybe the purpose of tragedy is to make you sad. So if you watch something and it makes you sad and emotional, it did its job. If the plant grows to a healthy plant, then it fulfills its purpose. Also, when the plant fulfills its purpose, and this is true of all other things, they set the groundwork and the basis for further development. So much like Plato, there's a hierarchy in the universe. Plato thinks that the hierarchy gets more and more abstract as you get higher. We get closer to the forms. But for Aristotle, it's sort of a for the sake of hierarchy, right? The plants exist for the sake of the animals exist for the sake of humans. All of nature maybe exists for the sake of humans exist for the sake of the gods, maybe, and it goes on, so on and so forth. Ultimately, for Aristotle, though, there's this one being that is the ultimate being, Aristotle's God, you could call it, the unmoved mover, if you want to get technical, the prime mover. All things move towards this perfection that is God. All things move towards this pure, perfect being, but always fall short. And so the universe has an aim. The universe has a purpose. And when we want to study things scientifically, like a biologist, we have to understand, what is this creature aiming at? What is the perfect specimen? And then we can understand all of the actions, all the activities, the way their body is designed, the way the organs are organized around each other. They can be understood and explained in terms of that purpose, in terms of that aim. In terms of that, telos is the Greek word that I've been wanting to use. I try to keep the jargon at a minimum, but telos, right? This Greek word that Aristotle uses quite a bit: an aim, an end, a purpose, a function, a goal. All things can be sort of understood teleologically in terms of their telos, all the steps that lead up to this end goal. So you sort of start at the end and work your way back with Aristotle. And even though, like I said, Plato was a very influential philosopher, you could argue still is in many regards, Aristotle overshadowed him slightly as a student, I have to say. I would argue that Aristotle was probably more important. In the first few centuries AD, with the rise of Christianity, Plato was pretty influential to the early church fathers. But when the Crusades began, and Christianity comes to dominance in Europe, and the Crusades begin, and you get Christian crusaders invading like northern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Aristotle is rediscovered. Many of his writings were lost, and so during the Crusades, the Western European Christians rediscover Aristotle, and from that point on, he is the man. I mean, he's not just the man in the Arab-speaking world, in the Muslim world, but also in the Christian world as well. So actually, I think we're ready to go on. I've got another PowerPoint, but I think it's safe. Let me stop sharing my screen for just a moment here and switch my PowerPoint. We're going to get to the modern period here in just a moment. So the medieval period, I don't want to say too much about. We can skip over it a little bit. That's not that fair, I suppose. I would say the medieval period is probably the most neglected in all of the philosophical periods. It's probably the least popular to study, and I don't know a lot about it. So maybe that's why maybe it's fair for me to gloss over it, because I probably wouldn't do it justice. I'm probably not going to do it justice. But let's very briefly here. I'm doing really good on time. I'm kind of proud of myself. So let's very briefly, and I'm going to try to get to the scientific revolution. But let's briefly go over some of the differences, some of the main shifts in focus, the distinctions between what I'm calling the classical period, or you could also refer to it as the ancient period and philosophy, and the modern period. And we'll say a little bit about the medieval period as well. So the classical period, which we're finally leaving after a very slow start this semester, the ancient period, uh, the focus, and this is going to be an oversimplification. All these claims I'm making are going to be a bit overly generalized. But the focus of ancient philosophy tended to be metaphysics, especially when you look at figures like Aristotle and Plato. When they're doing their most fundamental philosophy, they're typically doing their general views about reality. What is it to be real? What is real? What isn't? What is the nature of reality? What exists? And so it's not that they don't do other philosophy. Obviously, we've seen, Plato has all sorts of ethical concerns. He talks about love and all sorts of things. But his metaphysics informs everything else that he writes. You can even see it in the Apology if you look. It's not super obvious, but his metaphysical views about things that are more eternal have more value. So Socrates cares more about his soul than his body, than his life. And so again, metaphysics kind of informs it all. There wasn't a word for metaphysics back in ancient Greece. That's a word that was coined by medieval scholars. But what we call metaphysics today, Aristotle referred to as first philosophy. And so I suppose that's pretty good evidence that he thought it was pretty important. So this idea of first philosophy being metaphysics, how is it that things are? For Aristotle, all things are part form, part matter. Form's not something separate. Form and matter are tied together. Matter is what makes you you. It's the stuff that you're made of, the actual material, physical, whatever. And the matter is what it's sort of it's the type you are, right? Are you a chair? Are you a table? Are you a person? And that also determines your aim and your goal and what you gravitate towards. That's his metaphysics, and he applies it to his ethics, his politics, his biology, his physics. All his other philosophies based on his first philosophy, what we call metaphysics, theories of reality. Now, this changes a bit when we get to the medieval period with the rise of Christianity. Christianity in Western Europe becomes, the dominant force politically. We'll talk a little bit about that later on if we have time. I want to get, like I said, I want to get to the scientific revolution. But we also should probably talk a little bit about the rise of Christianity. But in the medieval period, the focus is not a whole lot. I mean, you could say that metaphysics is still pretty important. It's almost at the top of the hierarchy. But philosophy in general is sort of demoted during the medieval period because most of the super intellectual, real smart scholars, most of them are doing their work in a religious context. There are very few independent scholars, and so the focus shifts towards theology. And philosophy is seen as sort of the handmaiden, the servant of theology. You learn philosophy, you study the Greeks, you study your Plato, but those guys were pagans. The only reason you study the philosophers is so you can get real smart, you know how to think really well, and you can apply your brains and your arguments and all your good philosophy to theological pursuits, to doing theology. Now, who knows what is theology? I think I've used that word a bit today, and I'm just assuming you all understand what I'm talking about. Can someone tell me what is theology? What do you do when you study theology?
Isn't it the study of theories?
Good guess, but no. Here, think about it. Medieval period. The focus is religion. So what would you be studying if you were like a priest or a bishop or whatever?
Your religion?
Right. Yeah. I mean, literally, the word theology it comes from the Greek theos, which is God, and logos, which is study of, discipline, explanation of. There's a lot of ways you could translate logos. So literally, I guess you could say it means the study of God. But more generally, most people, they think of theology, and technically, it's the study of religion, but always from within that religion, from within a standpoint. So if you're a Catholic theologian, you're a Catholic, right? You actually believe the faith, and you study it. And so you read the Bible, and um, there somebody says Christianity, biblical study. Yeah, but you could also be like a Hindu theologian. They don't usually, if you're a Hindu, they don't usually use that word. They'll call you a Brahmin, or something. But a Westerner would technically call you a theologian if you study, you study all the old scriptures of your own religion and your faith. But yeah, so obviously in medieval Europe, Christianity was the dominant religion. It had the authority of the state. So yeah, you learn philosophy to do theology, to study religion. Now, when we get to people like Descartes, and Descartes, for better or worse, he is often referred to as the father of modern philosophy. To many scholars' chagrin, some of them think he doesn't deserve credit, that you should give that to perhaps Sir Francis Bacon, or there are others that might precede Descartes. I kind of see the argument on both sides. Maybe I'll get to that when we get back from spring break. But what Descartes does, and this is why I think, really, honestly, he kind of deserves that title, is that people like Descartes, and I think he's the paradigmatic case of this, they now shift the focus away from metaphysics. That was the focus of the classical philosophers. They're not going to focus on theology. Descartes says that philosophers need to stop doing theology and kind of separate themselves from the church, respect the church, let the church do theology, let the church, and Descartes even thinks the church can do ethics. He doesn't even want to mess with ethics. He just wants to focus on science, mathematics, general metaphysics, but the focus of philosophy, first philosophy for Descartes, is not metaphysics. First philosophy is epistemology. So the subtitle of his essay that we're reading, it's not the subtitle, it's the full title, Meditations on First Philosophy, that's really what he's referring to. He's referring to epistemology. Now, that's a word I haven't used in quite a while. I know we covered it at least once, if not a couple times. Does anybody remember what epistemology is? It's one of the major branches of philosophy. So we've got metaphysics, theories about reality, ethics or value theory, and
So
then
is it like the theory of knowledge, perhaps?
good. Yeah, exactly. You got it. So how do you know what you know? Theories of knowledge. Um, you ask questions like, well, what does it even mean to know anything? How do you define that word? When you say you know something, what does that mean? What are the criteria? What justifies knowledge claims? These are the basic questions that we have to start with. Descartes is going to argue. We need to know what the basis for our knowledge claims are. We have to know how it is that we come to acquire knowledge and whether or not that's a good method. And if it isn't, we need to come up with a good method. So theories of knowledge, epistemologies, that should be the first philosophy. That's what we should focus on. Now, why is there this big shift? That brings us to the scientific revolution. Let me get a new slide up here real quick. So the scientific revolution, or it's otherwise known as the Copernican revolution. So let's see. What do I want to talk about here? There's only a few figures. I mean, we could go on and on about the scientific revolution. There was a lot of interest. There were a lot of interesting things um, going on. Some, and again, this might be pretty unfair, but some scholars tend to look at the medieval period and even the Renaissance period in philosophy as kind of boring and stagnant. That they were just sort of building off of the Greek philosophers, and they weren't really contributing anything new besides their religious views. That's probably not absolutely fair, but there's reasons why they have that view. A lot of it was that. A lot of medieval philosophy was just that. Um, but who can tell me anything about the Copernican revolution? There's three. I'm hoping at least somebody knows something about one of these three men who I'm about to list here. Copernicus, he's kind of the first one, obviously, the big name. Some historians name the whole freaking revolution after him. And then there's Kepler, Johannes Kepler. And last but not least, we got Galileo. Most of you probably know Galileo, and most of you probably don't know the others, unfortunately. I don't know what. Public education is so bad. Everybody should know who Copernicus is, I think, especially, but no one seems to. Anybody familiar? Like, what is he known for? Anybody familiar with what his big insight? How does Copernicus change the way we look at the universe? Or how about this? What are some things? Forget about who was it that discovered them or thought about it first. What are some things that the ancients thought about the world, about the universe, and believed for hundreds of years that we no longer believe are true? And don't say that they thought the earth was flat. That's actually false. The Greeks knew the earth was round. Most medieval scholars knew the earth was round. It was,
But maybe not that. Maybe they knew that the earth was round, but it was still flat at the same time.
How can it be round and flat?
Well, I mean, I've seen early maps of the world. They draw it like it's a circle.
There were some in some time periods in some places, but we're talking about like medieval European scholars and Greek scholars. They had this view of orbs based on Aristotle. You had orbs within orbs. Like the earth, was sort of covered by all these other orbs and stuff like that. Even Thales had he had calculated the diameter of the earth, and he was only off by like a couple hundred miles or something like that.
Holy God!
Yeah, no, and that was like 700 BC. So it's actually false. I mean, there were a lot of people that weren't educated probably assumed the world was flat. A lot of people did think the world was flat. But yeah, you're right. You can find like little drawings of there's like this little glass orb with a flat earth, in the middle of it. And
it was kind of slow. I mean, we went as late as 1492. People were already saying, "Don't do it. You're going to fall off the edge of the world."
Yeah, but I'm telling you, those were people that were not astronomers. They were not scientists. I'm telling you, people knew the world was not flat. That's bad history. They taught that to me when I was in grade school. Everyone thought the world was flat until Columbus proved it. He proved that it was round. No. They knew it was freaking round. But what are some other things though that actually people did believe? Even astronomers and scientists, they actually thought this was true, but it turned out not to be true.
Does it have to do with the sun being in the center of the solar system?
Good.
I'm looking at Copernicus here, and I'm just like, obviously figure out that the sun is in the center, right?
Right.
Even though the church said, no, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure that's not true.
Right. Yeah. So Copernicus is the first that we know of to publish a work that actually puts forth this hypothesis that the sun might be at the center and Earth actually might be moving. And so before that, everybody just kind of assumed that Earth was in the middle of the entire universe, that it was stable, it didn't move,
The sun went around it.
Yeah, everything went around it. All the planets,
I mean,
all the stars.
I could kind of see why they believed it, because, day and night theory, I guess.
Right. No, in fact, that's what, in fact, you're kind of getting to my point. Like, this is kind of the ultimate point here. I mean, there's more to it than that, but one of the main things the reason I cover this scientific revolution is you got to kind of understand the psychology behind Descartes. A lot of people read his essay and they think he's crazy. And they think, like, why is he coming up with all these thought experiments? He's nuts. But you got to realize that what you just said is true. Like, a lot of these theories, like that the Earth is in the center, that the Earth is not moving, given the scientific tools that they were using, given the kind of observations that they were making, it wasn't that crazy to believe. It wasn't.
Right.
It was kind of made sense. It kind of made sense up to a point. Up to a point, though. After a while, it didn't work, and then these new theories were much better, right? So they were much more effective, at least, at making predictions. So you know about Copernicus. That's great. That puts a smile on my face. Most people are like, they kind of know that they know that the sun was in the middle and that used to be Earth was in the middle. People know that, but they're not able to pin it on Copernicus. So.
Oh well, now you found somebody.
Yeah.
I was laughing at your quote. How you said if you read Descartes' essays, you're gonna think he's crazy. But I'm like, every common person ever. Aren't all philosophers crazy?
Yeah, there's a famous quote from Aristotle, and he doesn't say philosophers are crazy, I don't think, but he says something like all geniuses have a little bit of crazy in them or something. You have to have a little kind of, and that's a popular sentiment, actually. I think it goes back at least as far as Aristotle, if not further. You find that Schopenhauer thinks that's true also. The artistic genius is kind of nuts,
Well, in order to think outside the box, you have to get a little crazy sometimes.
Right. So we're going to talk about, yeah, definitely. I think that's the problem, is that people get committed to the way things are understood, and it works for them. And so maybe it takes somebody who's a little bit out there to kind of say, well, maybe it could be otherwise, or see it a different way. Actually, let me get something going here before we move on to Kepler and Galileo. Can I get some shapes? Where are the shapes at? Here we go. I want to get a few circles here. Let's see. That's not a circle. That's an oval. Where's the circle? I don't freaking have any circles. What the hell? That looks like a circle. Okay.
You could also just do oval and then shape it into a circle.
Right. I'm being lazy.
Don't worry about it. We all do that. It's like, don't be lazy. I'm like, but this works, so why do I have to do that?
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So, and let me put a text box here. So we've got this assumption that we're working on before Copernicus. That's why I put the E in the middle there, right? So we got Earth in the middle. And this goes back to Aristotle and the Greeks, right? They were assuming, look, Earth's in the middle. It's the spherical orb. All the other planets revolve around it, and they also revolve around it in perfect circles. They're always the same distance from Earth, more or less. They're always moving the same speed. Aristotle had all these arguments for this. He thought the planets were divine, the stars were divine. They're all gods, or at least they're godlike, and so they must be perfect. And so circles are perfect. So they must be smooth. They probably have no blemishes on them. They're these perfect, beautiful orbs that move in the same speed. Why would they change speeds? If they're perfect, they wouldn't have to speed up or slow down. They're always going the right speed. They're always going the perfect speed. So
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going on holiday.
Oh, he's talking to somebody else. Sorry, I gotta mute.
I'm sorry about
back to me. So yeah, so all these assumptions: Earth's in the middle, unmoving. All the other planets are revolving around Earth. The sun, the moon, the stars, the planets are all revolving around the Earth. Perfect circles, moving at the same speed. This kind of worked, but it was pretty. There was a lot of room for error. Okay, there was a lot of what's the word? What's the term they use in statistics? Margin for error.
Yeah, I think that would be like percent change per se.
Yeah.
Like that's that small margin.
So
Yeah, sorry, I
imagine.
forgot to mute.
That's all good. So imagine you're like sitting here on Earth one night, and you're looking up at the sky, and oh geez, it's not working the way I want it to. And you see Mars, okay? You see Mars like right there. Mars is right there. You're on Earth, and you're like, okay, so I'm smart. I studied my Aristotle, and I know that Aristotle says the planets are gods, or they're perfect, or they're divine. Now the medievals, they're Christians. They don't believe all this stuff that the planets are gods, but they believe that God created the universe and that God made these things beautiful and perfect, and that there's this sort of clockwork to them by the divine creator that sends us messages, that we celebrate certain holidays on certain days because God has the seasons working it out that way or whatever. And so even when they moved on from paganism and became Christian, they still kind of maintained this because it was just rational, and God's rational, so he would make the universe rational. So again, I'm looking at the night sky, I'm looking at Mars, and I've got all these assumptions because I'm smart. I know my Aristotle, I know my astronomy. And so I look one night, Mars is there, and then the next night I look, and Mars has moved just that little bit, right? Oh, it moved a couple clicks on my measuring device. So I'm like, all right, well, so it moves 2 clicks per night. Awesome. So I predict that in 30 nights it'll be 60 clicks, so it'll be right here. So I'm predicting it's going to be right there. I hope you guys can see my little demonstration here. And so I'm predicting it's going to be right here. I wait my 30 nights or whatever it is that I predicted. I go out to the night sky, looking right there to expect to see Mars. I don't see it. It's actually way the hell up here. What the heck went wrong? This doesn't work. So the astronomers kept working on this, and you had people like Ptolemy. Suppose I should, write his name here, right? Ptolemy. I guess I need to make it wider there. So Ptolemy was a Roman astronomer who came up with this notion of epicycles to deal with some of these discrepancies. He was like, okay, well, it didn't quite work. I predicted Mars would be here, but Mars was actually up there. So what's probably going on, I'm not going to give up the idea that the planets move in circles. I'm not going to give up the idea that they move at the same speed, but maybe occasionally they do a circular movement outside of their circular movement, what he called an epicycle. So maybe Mars moves for a few days, and every few days it does a little curly Q. I guess I could let me put like another circle up here. So let's say, I gotta make it really tiny. Every few days, Mars moves, and every once in a while, it does a little loop-de-loop, and then it goes back on its course. And like every few days, there's another one, loop-de-loop. And so all the astronomers, they sort of latched onto this idea of the epicycles, and they kept adding and sometimes there'd be cycles within cycles. You'd have like triple epicycles, and it got super complicated. And eventually they worked out a system that was fairly accurate, but it still had its discrepancies, but it was a pain in the ass to deal with all these crazy equations. But once Copernicus comes along and he says, guys, you're crazy. Why don't we assume the sun is in the middle? Let's change that E to an S. Things got a lot better, but they still weren't right. What else is wrong with this picture? What else do we not believe? So now we got the sun in the middle. So we're moving on to this heliocentric model. That's a little bit better. How else can we improve it? Do the planets? Go ahead.
Other celestial beings?
I'm sorry.
Add the other celestial beings?
Yeah, yeah. Well, all the planets, the stars, whatever. Let's focus on the planets. That's kind of where I'm going with this. What's different about the planets to so this is the Ptolemaic model. It's actually the Ptolemaic model is a lot more complicated. But you've got you got Earth in the middle. All the planets move, and the sun as well, move in perfect circles around the Earth. They orbit around the Earth in perfect circles. They always have the same distance from Earth and the same speed. What's wrong about that picture? We already fixed one problem. Earth's not in the middle. The sun's in the middle. All the planets revolve around it. Now what else do we need to do to fix this? Do the planets move in perfect circles?
Well,
No.
yes, but actually no.
No, they don't. Not perfect circles. What shape is the orbit of a planet?
An
Oval?
oval-ish.
What's that?
I mean, it kind of varies per planet, so
Not really, not a lot.
I mean,
It's been a while since I took
take a look.
astrology, but
I mean, unless your name is Pluto, which is like oblong as hell.
right. Well, they're different, I guess, measurements. But what's the basic shape? There's obviously
Well, if
different.
they're not a circle,
They're not
if
a
they're not a
circle.
circle,
A circle is 360 degrees with all the points are equally distant from the center. Anything that isn't that is not a circle. So what is it if it's
you have
shaped?
to guess like an oblong circle or
There
like an
you go. Well,
oval
what's
or
an
something
what do
like
we
that.
call what? Is there such a thing as an oblong circle? I thought we called them ovals.
I mean, when you say something is oblong, it means
Ovals.
like off shape, if you know.
Well, oblong can be like taking a circle and like mashing it up like some Salvador Dali clock or something.
Yeah, I
But
don't know. I
oval,
always grew up with oblong as if it was like out of shape or something like that.
I'm looking up oblong right now.
Don't. I mean, I may be wrong. Just feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Elongated, rectangular, oval shape. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, an elongated shape. I'm sorry.
EVA from a square, circular, spherical form by elongation on one dimension. Oblong. Okay, so through elongation, right, stretching out. In a
So
way,
it's
I
kind of
guess.
like a stretch.
In a
Yeah.
way, I guess your answer's right, but there's a simple way to put it. Just say the word oval, right?
Oval. Yeah.
Or ellipses, right? So it's elliptical orbit is the astronomical term. Let's see.
I should have gone with that.
Are you basing it off of the galaxy shapes?
Not galaxy shapes, the shape of the orbit of the planets around the sun.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
there's names for elliptical galaxies,
Yeah.
egg-shaped galaxies, and spiral galaxies.
Well, we're talking about our galaxy. We still haven't even. I don't think that they even come up with the theory of galaxies until you get to like the 1800s or the late 1700s. I don't know if he actually deserves credit for it, but I think Kant. He's a philosopher. I think he died in 1805. There's something he wrote where he actually hypothesized that the stars were actually other suns, and that there were planets around those as well. He thought, well, man, he didn't even say that that's what it was true. He thought, wouldn't that be interesting? And so I guess at this point, we're still dealing with just our solar system as the only thing that's there. We're not even moving beyond the stars. But talking about the planets, one of the next big insights, though, is this notion of elliptical orbits. I hope you guys can still see my PowerPoint. I switched the screen a few times, so it might not be still up. Let me know if it's not up. That's not an elliptical. There we go. and I can't put the sun in the middle. Okay, let me see. Okay, there we go. So now we're moving to Kepler territory here. And we're moving to, I guess, closer to a Copernican model of the universe. And Kepler's big insight, or at least what he's famous for, is the proposal that, yes, the orbits are not perfect circles, that the planets do not move in perfect circles around the sun, but they have this elliptical orbit. And so the distance of the planet from the center of the galaxy is going to change. And also, I think, and this is the other thing he doesn't get as much credit for unless you take a class in astronomy. You'll learn Kepler's law, where he actually he talks about how the speed, the velocity of the planet changes, determined by how distant it is from the sun. So if it's further away or if it's closer, based on a new theory of gravity. Aristotle thought that because Earth is in the middle, that's what explains gravity. All things that are heavy, like water and Earth, fall. They fall to the center of the universe. They fall towards the center of Earth. But everything that's light, like air or fire, moves up. It moves towards the edge of the universe. And so that was sort of the going theory of why gravity exists. But Kepler had a new theory of gravity that there's a gravitational force that all objects have on each other. And so these planets, as they move further from the sun, their speed will change. There'll be less of a gravitational pull as when they're closer to the sun. So the speed changes. And he actually was able to calculate he was able to come up with a formula to calculate the velocity or the speed. I can't remember whether it's velocity or the speed. If you know what point of its orbit it's in, you know how fast it's going. So he did this. So Kepler's kind of smart guy. All these guys were very brilliant. On the other hand, if you look them up and read a little bit more about them, they also believed some pretty interesting kind of what you might think of as kind of wacky things too about the universe. But they were careful about what they published. Copernicus didn't publish his theories about this stuff till he was almost dead. I think Kepler didn't publish some of his stuff till after he was dead. And Galileo was, of these three figures, one of the only men to take a stake in this and to publicly defend these Copernican theories of the universe, the heliocentric view, and he supported Kepler's notion of gravity over Aristotle's notion of gravity. And what else is Galileo known for before I kind of get into the details of the scandal? What's he famous for? I think go ahead.
Wasn't it the telescope?
Good. And as far as I know, he actually shouldn't get credit for that.
Yeah, isn't it someone else that was experimenting with alchemy to find out about glass?
Right. I think he was the first one to patent it, and he was the first one to actually make it worth a crap. Like, he actually perfected the way to manufacture it so that you were actually able to use it. You could see the surface of the moon, and what do you think he was expecting to see? Remember, he looks through his telescope, he stares at the surface of the moon. What did I say earlier about Aristotle? Some of his assumptions about the celestial bodies. What do you think what Galileo was expecting to see the moon in a certain way, and he didn't? Well, he thought it would be beautiful. He thought it would be divine, perfect, smooth, like some beautiful jewel, glowing jewel in the sky. But what did he see? He saw a bunch of craters. It looked like a freaking desert up there. It was like desolate. Didn't look like a very hospitable place. So he was kind of shocked. And as I said, he wasn't shy about his discoveries. He actually experimented when he was in Pisa at the university there. he experimented. Maybe you learned this in science class. The experiment where he drops a apple and a feather from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa to try to show that they'll fall at the same speed. He actually couldn't do it. He tried. Apparently he wrapped a canvas sheet over the edge of the Leaning Tower of Pisa to try to create a vacuum with no wind turbulence, no disturbance, to make them. Yeah, Ronnie.
They showed that in the Cosmos.
Oh, I've never watched that. So that show, they talk about it in Cosmos. That's cool. Yeah, he couldn't quite. He got it close. But it wasn't perfect. And he was ridiculed for it. He was like fired, lost his job, and all this stuff, right? And so, but we now believe he was right. You know, Newtonian physics believes he's right, that actually objects will fall at the same speed in a vacuum, right? The same rate. Was it 9.8 meters squared, if I remember correctly from my physics class? But he was ridiculed. You know, he was ridiculed for this. You know, so objects that are heavier, they do fall faster, not because they're heavier, but because of the resistance. You know, the wind resistance. If you're heavier, the wind resistance is going to have less effect on that object. So Galileo, he puts his neck out for all this stuff, and how does it work out for him? The guy gets, you know, he gets chastised, he gets excommunicated from the church. What does that mean? What does it mean to get excommunicated from the church? You're kicked out, but ultimately, what's the big deal?
You're away from society.
Yeah, kind of. You're like an outcast, but even worse than that. Like maybe Galileo was an introvert and he's happy to be alone. He's like, screw him. Now I'm going to do my scientific experiments. You know, that's their problem.
In some cases, some people were assassinated.
Yeah, that's true. You could actually be killed. Yeah, you could be tortured to death by the Inquisition. But what would happen after you died? Even worse.
All your books get burned.
Well, yeah, but what happens to your soul?
According
to the church.
You go to hell.
Oh yeah, So yeah, forget about being tortured and all that stuff in this life. You're gonna go to hell forever. So, but Galileo did not relent. Apparently, I read somewhere a while back that he was I don't know what the term is, but recommunicated, let back into the church officially at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. And I remember the first time I heard that, I kind of laughed. I had this like image in my head of poor Galileo down in hell, you know, chained up, being tortured, and then like St. Peter's, you know, walking down there with his list, and oh man, sorry, we were wrong, you know, our bad. You're actually on the list. Where have you been for all these years, you know? I actually went to visit the cathedral where he's buried in Florence. Santa Croce, beautiful cathedral where they have a tomb. I don't know if you call it a tomb. It's you know, this, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a stand in honor of him, but no one really knows where he's buried. They know he's buried there, but when he died, he had to be buried in secret. So people at the Santa Croce, some of the bishops or whatever that sympathized with him, had his body buried there. So they don't know exactly where it is in the catacombs, but it's there. And so now they built later, now that he's accepted, they built something in honor of him there. So interesting historical facts. Why all the fuss though? I've got 1 minute left. We're going to have to kind of briefly recap this, and we're also going to have to talk about some other things involving the church and some other kind of revolutionary activities that don't really have so much to do with science, but more theological concerns. We'll have to return to that when we get back from the break. But really briefly, let's try to wrap this up if we can in a minute. Why were Copernicus and Kepler hesitant to publish their views, and why was Galileo in trouble for defending them? What's the big deal? So what? The Earth's not in the middle. So what? The planets don't move in perfect circles. So what? They don't move at a perfect speed. So what?
Just like
The Catholic Church.
Darwin, they waited a little bit because they wanted to make sure there's more evidence out there for their hypothesis to sound true.
That's probably part of the reason, but yeah, hold on, Jacob. Yeah, that's part of the reason, probably. I'm sure some of them are like, this can't be right. Aristotle's so smart, and I got to relook at this. But I think Jacob's got it, though. Really, like, probably, and this is the more likely. This is what most people focus on: is what were they afraid of? Jacob, what were you saying? I think you said it already, but say it again.
Oh yeah, I said it was because the Catholic Church sucks at. I'm just kidding. But seriously,
right, the church had a lot of authority, and this made them look like they were wrong because they were. And so,
like Galileo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when Galileo discovered it, he was like, they're like, okay, say it's not real and break the telescope, or we'll jail you. That was pretty much how it went out.
No, they told him. They told him, look, they put him under house arrest. And they told him, if you don't recant your views, you're going to be excommunicated, you're going to be arrested, And yeah, they threatened him because, it threatened their authority, right? So throughout the medieval period in Europe, the church was kind of like one of the only authorities that was constant. You had all sorts of these battles, and one king would overthrow another, and then there'd be a new duke that was in charge of your territory. Medieval Europe was a chaotic, dangerous, ugly place to live if you were a commoner. Even if you were royalty, it wasn't so great sometimes. You had the plague to deal with. The church was sort of like there, and they spent centuries taking the most advanced, what they thought of as the most advanced science. We laugh now, we don't think it's science, but the most advanced science, the most intelligent Greek thought, and they were able to show how it actually fit together with their religion very nicely. And now that's starting to become challenged. Their authorities start to become challenged. And I'm sorry, I'm making you guys stay late. It's already 2 minutes over now. The clock just turned, so I'll have to end it there. But we'll cover this briefly. We'll rush through this again at the beginning, next class after the break. But for next time, please read the first meditations, Descartes' first meditation, and get started on the second meditation.